The airport was loud in the way airports always are. Rolling suitcases tapped against the shiny floor. Announcements echoed through the air, half clear and half lost in noise. People stood in lines, stared at their phones, hugged loved ones, or rushed past strangers without making eye contact. It was just another evening filled with ordinary lives moving in different directions. He stood near gate 14 with his young daughter beside him, holding her small backpack in one hand and their boarding passes in the other. He looked like any other tired parent. His shirt was slightly wrinkled from a long day. There were faint lines under his eyes that told a story of years without enough sleep. But when he looked down at his daughter, his face softened. She was talking nonstop about the clouds she hoped to see from the window seat. She loved flying. She loved the feeling of being above the world. He listened carefully, nodding, smiling at the right moments. Even when he was exhausted, he never made her feel like her words were small. Being a single father had changed him in ways he never expected. A few years earlier, his life had been very different. Back then, he had someone to share the weight of parenting. Now, every decision rested on his shoulders. Every scraped knee, every school project, every nightmare in the middle of the night. It was all him. He worked long hours. Sometimes he fixed heating systems. Other days, he took repair jobs wherever he could find them. He did not complain. Bills had to be paid. Lunchboxes had to be packed. Shoes had to be replaced when little feet outgrew them faster than he could believe. The trip they were returning from was not a vacation. They had visited his late wife's parents in another state. It had been emotional, but important. He wanted his daughter to stay connected to that side of her family. He wanted her to remember stories, faces, and traditions. He never wanted her to feel like something was missing, even though he knew there always would be. "Daddy, do you think we'll see lightning from the sky?" she asked, swinging her legs in the plastic airport chair. "I hope not," he said gently, smiling. "But we'll see stars if it's clear." She seemed satisfied with that answer. Around them, people were glued to their screens. A businessman argued quietly on a phone call. A group of teenagers laughed loudly over a shared video. An elderly couple sat silently, hands folded together, watching the crowd. He noticed everything, not because he was nosy, but because life had taught him to stay aware. When you raise a child alone, you learn to observe. You look for exits. You notice who is nearby. You calculate small risks without even realizing you're doing it. When boarding was announced, he let others go first. He always did. There was no rush. He adjusted his daughter's jacket, checked that she still had her stuffed toy tucked under her arm, and then walked calmly toward the line. Inside the plane, he helped her into the window seat. She pressed her face against the glass immediately, eyes wide with wonder. He placed their bag under the seat and double-checked her seatbelt. Across the aisle, an older man struggled with his carry-on bag. Without hesitation, he stood up and helped lift it into the overhead bin. "Thank you," the man said, slightly embarrassed. "It's no problem," he replied with a simple nod. He returned to his seat as if it were nothing. To him, it truly was nothing. Helping others had become second nature. Maybe it was how he was raised. Maybe it was because he knew what it felt like to need help and not always have it. As the plane began to taxi, his daughter reached for his hand. She always did during takeoff. He squeezed gently. "You're safe," he whispered. The engines roared louder. The plane lifted off the ground, and the city lights below became tiny sparkles. His daughter gasped with excitement. He watched her instead of the view. Her joy mattered more than any skyline. While she looked out the window, he allowed his thoughts to wander. He thought about work waiting for him the next morning. He thought about a school meeting scheduled later in the week. He wondered if he had remembered to turn off the kitchen light before leaving home. Small, ordinary worries filled his mind. But beneath all that was something deeper. A quiet promise he had made years ago. The night he became the only parent left, he had stood beside a hospital bed holding a tiny hand and silently promised that he would never let fear stop him from protecting his child. He did not know what that would require. He just knew he would do whatever it took. The flight attendants moved through the aisle offering drinks. His daughter asked for apple juice. He chose water. He barely touched it. He noticed a faint vibration under his feet at one point, but he assumed it was normal turbulence. Flying was never perfectly smooth. Other passengers did not seem concerned. Some were sleeping already. Others watched movies with headphones on. His daughter eventually grew quiet, her energy settling. She leaned against him. "Will you always sit next to me on planes?" she asked softly. "Always," he answered without hesitation. She closed her eyes for a moment, trusting that answer completely. Time passed slowly in the air. Outside the window, clouds drifted like soft mountains. The sky darkened as evening deepened. Cabin lights dimmed. He adjusted the small blanket over his daughter's lap and leaned his head back. Though he did not sleep, he rarely did in situations where he felt responsible for someone else's safety. Across the aisle, the older man he had helped earlier began coughing lightly. He reached into the seat pocket for a water bottle and handed it across without being asked. The man nodded gratefully again. Small acts. Quiet moments. Nothing dramatic. If someone had looked at him then, they would have seen an ordinary father on an ordinary flight. No spotlight. No sign of anything unusual ahead. But the truth is, courage rarely looks dramatic at first. It often hides in daily choices. In showing up. In staying patient. In choosing kindness when no one is watching. As the plane continued to the night sky, his daughter fell fully asleep against his arm. He did not move, even when his shoulder began to ache. He let it ache. He had learned long ago that discomfort was a small price for someone else's comfort. He looked around the cabin one more time. People were relaxed now. Some snored softly. The world outside felt far away. He had no idea that within the next hour, everything would change. No idea that alarms would soon replace the quiet hum of the engines. No idea that fear would spread faster than anyone could imagine. For now, there was only a father sitting beside his sleeping child, thinking about homework assignments, grocery lists, and whether she would still want to hold his hand when she was older. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, carefully so she would not wake. In that simple moment, nothing else mattered. He was not thinking about being brave. He was only thinking about getting home. The first sign that something was wrong was so small that almost no one noticed it. It was a strange shake under the floor, different from normal turbulence. Not strong enough to scare anyone, but different. He felt it through his shoes before he heard anything unusual. His eyes opened fully, even though he had not been asleep. His daughter was still resting against his arm, breathing softly. The plane gave another slight shudder. A few passengers looked up from their screens. One person removed their headphones. The older man across the aisle stopped coughing and glanced around. Then came a faint smell. It was light at first, almost easy to ignore. Something like overheated plastic. A few people wrinkled their noses but said nothing. The seatbelt sign turned on with a sharp ding. That sound changed the air inside the cabin. The flight attendants stopped smiling. They walked faster now, whispering to each other near the front. One of them picked up the intercom, paused, then set it back down without speaking. His heart began to beat a little faster. Not panic. Not yet. Just awareness. He gently adjusted his daughter, so she would wake slowly instead of suddenly. She blinked and looked up at him. "Are we landing?" she asked, still half asleep. "Not yet," he said calmly. "Just keep your seatbelt tight, okay?" She nodded, sensing something in his tone, but trusting him completely. The plane dipped slightly. Not sharply, but enough to make a few people gasp. Overhead bins rattled. This time, more heads turned. A flight attendant's voice came over the speaker, controlled but tight. She explained they were experiencing a technical issue and would be making an emergency landing as a precaution. She asked everyone to remain calm. The word emergency hit the cabin like a wave. Whispers started immediately. A woman 2 rows back began praying quietly. A man near the wing muttered, "This can't be happening." Someone dropped the phone, and it clattered loudly on the floor, making people jump. He felt his daughter's fingers grip his arm. "Daddy!" Her voice was small now. He turned to her fully, lowering his head, so their eyes were level. "Listen to me," he said gently. "Everything is going to be okay. The pilots know what they're doing. We're just going to land a little early." "Is it bad?" "No," he said, even though he did not know. "It's just different." The smell grew stronger, not overwhelming, but clear now. Something was not right. The plane began descending faster. The angle felt steeper than usual. The engine sounded louder, almost strained. The cabin lights flickered once, then stayed steady. Across the aisle, the older man struggled to tighten his seatbelt with shaking hands. Without thinking, he leaned over and helped secure it. "You'll be fine," he said quietly. The man swallowed and nodded, fear written across his face. Outside the window, city lights appeared far below. Too fast. They were dropping quickly. Another announcement came. This time the instructions were direct. Brace positions. Stay seated until instructed. Leave belongings behind if evacuation becomes necessary. That word, evacuation, caused real panic. A child somewhere near the back started crying loudly. Someone shouted a question at a flight attendant who was already moving quickly down the aisle checking seatbelts. The plane shook again. Harder this time. Gasps filled the cabin. His daughter buried her face against him. He wrapped both arms around her. "You remember what we practiced?" he whispered. She nodded against his chest. They had once watched a safety video together and turned it into a little game at home. It seemed silly at the time. Now it mattered. The ground rushed closer outside the window. The runway lights lined up beneath them. The landing was rough. The wheels hit hard. A loud thud shook everyone forward. Some people screamed. The plane bounced once, then slammed down again. The sound of metal against runway was sharp and heavy. The aircraft raced down the strip faster than usual. Brakes screeched. The cabin shook violently. Then there was another noise. A loud pop from somewhere near the wing. He looked out the window instinctively. He saw something that made his stomach drop. A flicker of orange. Flames. They were small at first, but real. Passengers near the windows saw it too. Shouts erupted instantly. Fire. The word spread faster than anything else. The plane slowed but did not stop immediately. Smoke began trailing past a window. Not thick yet, but visible. The aircraft finally came to a halt. For half a second, there was silence. Then chaos exploded. Flight attendants shouted commands. "Stay seated. Stay seated." But fear had already taken over many people. Smoke started seeping into the cabin. Thin, gray but growing. The emergency doors were opened. Inflatable slides deployed with loud bursts of air. "Leave everything," a crew member yelled. "Move quickly." Passengers unbuckled at once. Some pushed forward. Others froze in their seats. He stayed calm, not because he felt calm. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it, but because his daughter was watching him. He unbuckled her first. "Hold my hand. Do not let go." She nodded, tears forming but not falling yet. People crowded the aisle. A suitcase fell from an overhead bin, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. Someone tripped over it. The smoke grew thicker. He lifted his daughter into his arms to keep her above the pushing bodies. He moved with purpose, not rushing wildly but not hesitating either. They reached the exit row. Heat was now noticeable. Not unbearable, but real. The orange glow outside was brighter. A flight attendant helped guide them to the door. "Slide and run far from the aircraft," she shouted. He held his daughter tightly as they sat at the edge of the open door. "Close your eyes," he told her. They pushed off. The slide felt faster than expected. They landed hard on the runway, rolling slightly. He stood immediately, pulling her up with him. "Run," he said. They ran across the dark pavement toward flashing emergency lights in the distance. Sirens wailed. Airport vehicles were racing toward the plane. Behind them, the flames were larger now. Other passengers slid down quickly, some stumbling when they hit the ground. Some cried. Some screamed. Some just stood frozen in shock. He kept moving until they were a safe distance away. A responder in a bright jacket approached them. "Are you both okay?" "Yes," he said quickly. "We're okay." He knelt down and checked his daughter's face. No burns. No injuries. Just fear. "You did so good," he told her, brushing soot lightly from her cheek. She finally started crying then, the delayed release of terror. He hugged her tightly. Around them, the scene was overwhelming. Flashing lights painted the runway in red and blue. Fire crews aimed hoses toward the wing. Smoke rose into the night sky. Passengers gathered in small groups, some calling loved ones, others staring at the burning aircraft in disbelief. Everyone was moving away from it. Everyone was focused on getting as far from danger as possible. He stood there holding his daughter, feeling relief wash over him in heavy waves. They had made it out. They were safe. Or so he thought. Then, through the noise of sirens and shouting, he heard something else. A sound that did not belong outside on the runway. Faint, desperate, crying. It was coming from the direction of the plane. His body stiffened. He turned slowly toward the aircraft. Smoke was thicker now. Firefighters were still positioning equipment. Not all exits had been used. The crying came again, carried by the wind. His daughter clutched his jacket tighter. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. He did not answer immediately, because in that moment, he understood something that made his chest tighten. Not everyone was out. The crying did not stop. It grew louder, more desperate, cutting to the chaos of alarms, sirens, and shouting passengers. He could hear it clearly now, even over the roar of flames licking the side of the plane. It was human, terrified, trapped, a sound that refused to be ignored. His daughter tugged at his arm, fear wide in her eyes. "Daddy, what is it?" she whispered. Her voice trembled, barely audible above the noise around them. He knelt to meet her gaze, holding her hands tightly, feeling the warmth and softness of her small fingers. He took a slow breath. Someone is still inside," he said quietly. "I think someone needs help." She stared at him, wide-eyed, as if she couldn't understand. He could feel her fear. She wanted to run, to hide, to be safe. And she was right. Most people were already moving towards safety, leaving the burning aircraft behind. Everyone was running away, but something inside him shifted. The thought of leaving someone behind felt unbearable. He had promised long ago, when he first held his daughter in his arms, that he would protect others if he could. That promise, combined with deep, unshakable instinct, made his next decision clear. He gently lifted his daughter into the arms of a nearby responder, someone in a bright yellow vest who had been helping evacuated passengers. "She's safe," he said. "Take care of her, please." The man nodded quickly, shielding her with his arms. She clung to him for a moment, looking back at her father. He gave her a small, reassuring nod before turning away. Turning away was harder than anything he had ever done. The flames roared louder, the heat now pressing against his face. Smoke drifted toward him, thick and acrid, but he could not ignore the cries inside. He stepped forward. Fear shot through him instantly. Every muscle in his body screamed to stop. The heat was intense. The smoke burned his eyes and throat. The alarm screamed. The crowd of passengers screamed. Panic screamed. And yet, he kept moving. Not fast, but deliberate, steady, each step measured, each inhale cautious. He could feel the grit of ash on his skin, smell the stench of burning material, taste the smoke on his tongue. Inside, the plane was a nightmare. Flames had already begun to spread along the ceiling, flickering across panels and seats. Smoke filled the cabin, thick and choking. Visibility was poor, and every step had to be careful. He could hear the muffled cries more clearly now, desperate and fragile. The first person he found was an elderly man near the rear of the plane. He had fallen in his seat and was struggling to stand. His hands shook and his face was pale. He looked at the approaching flames and froze, terror rooting him in place. "Sir," he called, voice strong but controlled. "I'm here to help you. Can you stand?" The man's eyes widened. I can't move fast enough," he stammered. "I'll burn if I try." He shook his head. "No, we're getting out together. I won't leave you." With careful movements, he guided the man to his feet, his arms wrapped around him, steady and strong, even as smoke stunned his eyes and fire crackled dangerously close. Step by step, they made their way to the nearest exit. Passengers outside screamed, waving arms, calling names, urging everyone to keep moving. Firefighters were arriving, stretching hoses toward the flames. But some areas were still impossible to reach. Some people were still trapped. He went back inside. The flight attendant he had seen near the rear was struggling. She had fallen while trying to help passengers. Her leg twisted at a painful angle, and she could not get up. Smoke surrounded her. He reached her quickly, careful not to lose footing. "I've got you," he said. "We're going to get out." Her eyes were wide with fear. She nodded, barely able to speak. He lifted her as gently as he could, feeling her weight, but not letting it slow him down. Step by step, he guided her toward the door, feeling the heat on his skin, the flames near, the smoke thickening. Outside, he emerged, coughing violently. Emergency personnel rushed to help. He barely noticed them. He set the flight attendant down gently and checked her over. She was trembling, terrified, but alive. He did not stop. The cries inside drew him back again. Another passenger, a young woman, was pinned under debris near the wing. The flames had begun to lick around the edges, hungry and fast. He did not hesitate. He ducked under part of the fuselage carefully, lifting the obstacle just enough to free her. She scrambled to him, gasping, clutching his arm in disbelief. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, shaken, but full of relief. He nodded, coughing, smoke filling his lungs, but kept moving toward the next call for help. There was no thought of glory, no thought of fame. There was only the sound of human voices in danger, the desperate need for someone to act. Minutes felt like hours. His lungs burned. His eyes watered. His skin stung. He could feel exhaustion setting in, but he ignored it. Each step counted. Each saved person mattered. Every life mattered. One by one, he found those still trapped, guiding them outside, steady and unyielding. Each time he returned into the fire, he felt the heat grow stronger, the smoke thicker, but he did not falter. Fear existed, yes, but it did not control him. He focused on what needed to be done. Some passengers were too weak to walk. He lifted them. Some were too terrified to move. He carried them, supporting their shaking bodies. Others needed instructions. He calmed them, whispered guidance, directed them toward the exits, toward safety. Firefighters finally reached parts of the plane he could not access alone, but he stayed inside until the last possible moment, refusing to leave anyone behind. Each person he helped escape, each small victory, drove him forward. Eventually, the worst of the immediate danger passed. Everyone still alive was outside the plane. He stood back for a moment, looking at the burning fuselage. Flames danced and roared, consuming what had been a normal, ordinary flight minutes before. He was covered in soot, sweat, and ash. His lungs burned. His body screamed at him to stop, to rest. But the relief of knowing everyone he could save was now alive filled him with a quiet satisfaction. His daughter ran to him as soon as she could. She wrapped her arms around him tightly, crying and laughing at the same time. "Daddy, you're back!" she shouted, her small body trembling with emotion. He held her, letting her cling to him. "I'm here," he said softly. "I'm here." Around them, emergency responders continued their work. He found an elderly woman near the back, unable to walk because of a twisted ankle. She looked at him, eyes wide with panic. He knelt, careful not to touch the flames. "I'm going to carry you," he said softly. "We're going to get out together." She nodded, trembling. He lifted her carefully into his arms, feeling the strain on his muscles but ignoring it. Step by step, he carried her toward the exit, every movement measured, every step deliberate. The fire's heat pressed closer, but he refused to let it stop him. Finally, they reached the slide. He set her down gently, making sure she was stable. Emergency responders grabbed her, checking her condition. He barely paused. Another cry, another life needing him. Inside, the plane had become almost unrecognizable. Flames licked along the ceiling. Seats were twisted. Smoke filled every corner. Each breath was a struggle, each step a risk, but he continued. He found a young man pinned under the edge of a seat. He lifted it just enough for the man to crawl out. The man coughed violently but nodded in thanks. The last person he reached was a flight attendant, trapped near the wing. She was terrified, almost paralyzed by fear. He grabbed her hand. "Come on, we're leaving now. You can do this." She hesitated, and he did not argue. He spoke softly but firmly. "I will not let you stay behind. You are coming with me." Together, they moved slowly toward the emergency exit. Smoke filled their lungs. Heat burned their skin. Flames roared behind them. But he never faltered. When they finally emerged, he collapsed slightly, exhausted. The fire had done its worst, but everyone he could save was now outside. People were crying, hugging each other, thankful for life. He held the flight attendant upright, checking her for injuries. She looked at him, disbelief and gratitude written all over her face. You saved us," she said softly. "I only did what I had to," he replied, voice rough from smoke and shouting. "Everyone deserves a chance." His daughter ran to him, eyes wide, tears streaming. "Daddy, you came back," she shouted, throwing her arms around him. He hugged her tightly, feeling the warmth of her small body against his own. The fire roared behind him, the plane of massive destruction. But in that moment, he felt something he had not felt in years. Relief, satisfaction, a deep, unshakable knowledge that he had done what he was meant to do. Emergency personnel guided the remaining passengers to safety. Firefighters aimed hoses at the flames, but the worst of the danger had passed. He stood there, soot-covered, exhausted, lungs burning, body trembling, but alive. And everyone he could help was alive, too. He looked at the burning aircraft, then at his daughter. She was safe. That was all that mattered. He realized something then. Real courage is not measured by medals or fame. It is measured in small, quiet acts, in stepping forward when everyone else steps back, in loving fiercely, even in the face of fear. And in that moment, as the fire crackled and emergency lights flashed around him, he understood something profound. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is action in spite of it. He held his daughter tightly, breathing deeply, feeling the ache of his muscles and the burn of smoke in his lungs. He had faced real danger, and he had acted. He had stepped into fire, and he had saved lives. That night, as chaos swirled around them, as sirens blared and the smell of smoke filled the air, he finally allowed himself to feel something he had not felt in a long time. Quiet, steady pride. Not for himself, but for the chance to do what was right. And though the night was far from over, he knew, deep down, that in this moment, he had lived courage in its purest form. The flames had been put out by now, but the smoke still hung in the air, gray and heavy. Emergency vehicles surrounded the runway, lights flashing, sirens wailing, as responders worked to make sure every passenger was safe. People were being checked, guided to ambulances, wrapped in blankets, crying, hugging, trying to calm children who did not understand what had just happened. It was chaos, but it was a different kind of chaos now, a kind where survival was certain, but the shock had yet to fade. He stood near the edge of the scene, his daughter clinging to his side. She was quiet now, exhausted, soot-streaked, and trembling slightly from adrenaline. He held her close, stroking her hair gently, feeling her warmth, her small body pressed against his. Her eyes were wide, taking in the aftermath, but she trusted him completely. In that moment, he realized how fragile life was, how thin the line between safety and disaster could be. Reporters and camera crews had started to arrive, capturing the story for the world. Passengers were being interviewed, shaken, their stories jumbled and fragmented. He noticed them glancing toward him, seeing the soot on his clothes, the exhaustion in his eyes. But he did not approach them. He had no desire for attention. He had acted because it had to be done, not for praise, not for recognition, but because leaving someone behind was never an option. A few people had already started calling him a hero. Passengers, flight attendants, even emergency responders had whispered the word as they saw him return to help others. But he could barely process it. To him, it was simple. Anyone in his position would have done the same. Courage was not about glory. It was about choice. It was about stepping forward when the moment demanded it. Paramedics approached him and his daughter, checking them over. His daughter had no injuries beyond a few small scratches from the slide. He had a few minor cuts and burns from smoke and heat, but nothing life-threatening. He exhaled slowly, relief washing over him like a wave he had been holding back for hours. He looked around the runway, taking in the scene. The plane was damaged beyond repair, a burnt husk against the dark sky. Firefighters were still dousing hot spots, ensuring nothing else could flare up. People were being led to buses, taken to temporary shelters, or guided to ambulances. Families reunited in tears, holding on to each other, some silently, some speaking in frantic voices. He thought about the passengers he had helped. Every face flashed in his mind. The elderly man who could not move quickly, the flight attendant pinned under debris, the young child alone in the middle of the plane. Each person was alive because he had acted, because he had made a choice when fear had tried to stop him. He had no words for the feeling inside him. Pride was too small, relief too simple. Perhaps gratitude for the chance to act, to do the right thing, was closer to what he felt. Reporters finally approached him. They asked questions about why he had returned to the plane, why he had risked himself while everyone else ran away. Cameras flashed, lights bright and intrusive against the darkened night. He answered simply, carefully, "I did what I had to do. Someone was trapped. I couldn't leave them behind. That's all." A reporter pressed further. "Were you not afraid?" He shook his head slowly. "Of course I was afraid. But fear doesn't mean you stop. It means you have to act anyway." The simplicity of his words drew attention. There was no embellishment, no dramatic flair, just truth, just honesty. And in that honesty, people could see courage, not the kind written in stories, but real, human courage, born from love, responsibility, and instinct. Helping others, treating the injured, and securing the scene. But he barely noticed now. In that moment, all that mattered was his daughter, safe in his arms, and the knowledge that he had done everything he could. No one else could claim what he had done inside. No medal could measure the fear he faced or the risk he took. He did not do it for recognition. He did not do it for reward. He did it because it was the only thing he could do, because leaving someone behind was not an option. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt a different kind of exhaustion, not from work, not from life, not from responsibility. This was a deep, bone-deep tiredness, a tiredness born from facing real danger and stepping forward anyway. He looked back at the plane one last time, the flame still bright against the night sky. He thought of all the passengers, all the faces, all the people whose lives would continue because of what he had done. And he felt something unfamiliar but welcome, pride. Not pride in himself, exactly. Pride in humanity. Pride in what people could do when fear tried to control them. Pride in the quiet strength that sometimes emerges in the most ordinary of men. His daughter hugged him tightly. "I was scared," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but you were brave too. You stayed calm. You listened. You trusted me." She smiled through her tears, and for a brief moment, the chaos of fire, smoke, and fear disappeared. It was just them, father and daughter, safe, together. And though the night had tested him in ways he could never have imagined, he knew, deep down, that the choice he made, the step he took toward danger, had changed everything. It had shown him what courage really was. It had shown him that fear could be faced, that panic could be controlled, and that love, the love for another human being, could drive a person farther than they ever thought possible. For now, he held his daughter close, feeling the warmth and the beating of her heart against his own. He knew the night was far from over, and the world would continue to move, busy and unaware. But in this small moment, he understood something larger, that real courage is not about being fearless. It is about stepping forward, even when fear is louder than reason, because someone else's life depends on it. And that is exactly what he had done. The fire was spreading fast now. Flames licked the side of the plane, and smoke poured out like a thick gray cloud that blocked the stars above. Heat pressed against everything nearby. Even standing outside for a moment made his skin sting, but he knew he could not stop. Someone else was still inside, and every second mattered. He had left his daughter with a responder, telling her she was safe, but her small eyes were still worried. She wanted to stay close, to understand why he had gone back in. He wanted to reassure her, but there was no time. She would have to trust him once more. He took a deep breath and stepped toward the plane. The first thing he saw inside was chaos. The cabin was half filled with smoke, the smell of burning materials sharp and choking. People were panicked, some still stuck in their seats, some crawling toward exits. The roar of the fire echoed through the metal walls. Every step had to be careful. One wrong move could mean disaster. The first person he reached was a woman trapped under a fallen piece of luggage. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she tried to push herself up, but the weight was too much. "Hold on, I've got you," he said firmly. He lifted the bag just enough for her to crawl out. She scrambled to him, coughing, and he helped her stand. She was shaking violently, but she was alive. He barely had a moment to breathe. Another cry sounded from the other side of the cabin. He saw a young man pinned near the aisle. His leg was stuck under the seat. Sweat and soot covered him. Panic made him push against the metal, but he could not free himself. "Hey, I'm here. We're getting out," he shouted. The young man's eyes flicked toward him, relief and fear mixed in equal measure. Step by step, he helped lift the seat just enough to release the man. Together, they stumbled toward the exit, choking and coughing but moving towards safety. He was aware of the fire behind him. It was growing, hungry and relentless. Each second inside felt heavier than the last, the air hotter, the smoke thicker. He could feel the burn of it on his lungs and throat, but he focused on the people in front of him. Each life mattered more than his own comfort or fear. A flight attendant was still struggling near the rear exit. She had been helping passengers but had fallen over some debris. She tried to stand but winced in pain, clutching her ankle. He reached her quickly, speaking calmly. "I've got you. We're going to get out together." She nodded weakly, trusting him completely. He bent slightly to support her, guiding her carefully through the cabin. They moved step by step, dodging flames that were spreading along the ceiling. The smoke was so thick he could barely see, and the heat made his skin ache. But he did not stop. Finally, they reached the emergency door. The slide was already inflated, and he guided her onto it. The rapid descent to ground made both of them stumble slightly, but he caught her and helped her steady herself. Outside, emergency responders ran toward them, ready to assist. He barely noticed them. His focus was still inside, still on anyone who had not made out yet. The cries drew him back in. Another passenger, a child alone near the middle of the plane, was stuck under a twisted piece of metal from the seat. The fire had not reached them yet, but smoke surrounded the area. He crawled toward them, ignoring the heat on his arms and legs. "Don't be afraid. I'm here to help you," he said. His voice cut through the chaos, steady and calm. The child looked up, terrified, tears streaking their face. He lifted the debris carefully, freeing the child. Holding them close, he guided them toward the exit. The child clung to him, shaking and coughing but alive. He could feel the weight of their fear, but also the fragile hope growing as they neared safety. One by one, he continued. Each person he helped out was a victory, but each return inside felt heavier. The flames roared closer to rear, smoke thickened, and he could feel his lungs burning. Every step was a test of endurance, of courage, of focus. The older man he had helped earlier was now helping other passengers outside. Seeing that gave him strength. He knew he was not alone in the effort, even if it felt like it. Courage was contagious. Fear, too, but right now, determination led the way. News crews began broadcasting images of the scene. Flames, smoke, emergency personnel, passengers in blankets, hugging, crying. But the story that spread fastest was not the fire, not the chaos. It was a single father who had gone back into the burning plane. A quiet man, unseen before, who had risked everything for others. People call him a hero, but he remained grounded, uninterested in labels. His daughter tugged at his jacket, her small hand warm against his. "Daddy, you're really brave," she said softly, her voice still trembling from the adrenaline and fear. He bent down to her level, brushing soot from her face. "You were brave too," he said gently. "You stayed calm, listened to me, and trusted me. That's courage as well." She smiled slightly, clinging to him, and for a moment, the chaos of the night faded. It was just the two of them, safe together, a bond strengthened by the ordeal they had endured. In the days that followed, he was approached by the passengers he had helped. The elderly man stopped by his home, slowly walking, leaning on a cane, but smiling with gratitude. The flight attendant sent letters, detailing how his actions had changed her life, how she had been given a second chance. The child's parents sent a small note of thanks, words simple but heartfelt. Each message reminded him that real impact was measured not in headlines or fame, but in lives touched, in fear replaced with hope. He refused reward money offered by the airline and media. He asked that any donations or recognition be directed instead to programs that would help passengers in emergency situations, or to organizations assisting victims of burns and accidents. He wanted something lasting to come from the night's terror, something beyond headlines and applause. Life slowly returned to normal. Work resumed. Bills had to be paid. School meetings attended. Breakfast made. Evenings spent helping with homework. Ordinary life, simple and quiet. But something had changed. His daughter now looked at him differently. She saw not just a parent, not just a provider, but someone who could act when it mattered most. Someone who faced fear, not because he was unafraid, but because love and responsibility demanded it. He had shown her what courage looked like. She would carry that lesson for the rest of her life. Even he felt different. Life had always been about survival, about doing what was necessary to keep moving forward. But now, he understood that survival was not just about avoiding danger. It was about stepping toward it when others could not. It was about protecting, helping, and choosing to act even when fear was loudest. Months later, the stories of the burning plane continued to appear in news reports, social media, and casual conversation. He rarely engaged. People continued to call him a hero, but he continued to shrug it off. The true reward had been the lives saved, the gratitude in the eyes of strangers, and the safe, trusting smile of his daughter. The elderly man he saved visited their home occasionally, always smiling, leaning on his cane, sharing small memories of the flight. The flight attendant sent letters every year, recounting how his actions had given her a second chance. Each person reminded him quietly, without fanfare, that what he had done mattered. That courage had consequences beyond the immediate moment. He never planned to be a hero. He never sought recognition. He never imagined that a single moment, a single decision to step toward danger, would define how others saw him. And yet, that moment had changed him in ways no news story or award ever could. He taught his daughter quietly, not with words, but with actions, that love could drive people farther than fear ever could. That even in the face of danger, the right thing to do was often hardest, and the hardest was the bravest. That ordinary people could do extraordinary things, sometimes without realizing it. And so life went on. Mornings full of homework and breakfast. Afternoons spent at work. Evenings spent reading stories and tucking his daughter in. Small, ordinary routines became reminders of what mattered most. Safety, family, and the quiet courage that shaped every decision. At night, when the world was silent and the events of that night seemed like a distant nightmare, he would sometimes remember the heat of the flames, the smoke filling the cabin, the sound of cries cutting through the roar. He would remember each person he had helped, the relief in their eyes, the fear replaced with hope. And he would feel a quiet satisfaction, not for himself, but for the fact that he had acted when it mattered. In time, he realized something fundamental. Heroism is not about recognition. It is about choices. It is about doing the right thing when it is hardest. It is about love. Love for another human being. Love for family. Love for the life that binds people together. He looked at his daughter one evening, brushing her hair back gently as she prepared for bed. She looked up at him, eyes wide. "You're the bravest person I know," she said. He smiled softly. "Not brave because I am fearless," he said. "Brave because I chose to act when it mattered most." She nodded, absorbing the lesson, and in that moment, he understood that the impact of that night, the act of stepping forward while everyone else ran, would continue far beyond the fire, far beyond the headlines, and far beyond the fear. He had saved lives. He had shown courage. He had taught love and responsibility in their purest form. And as he tucked his daughter in, he knew that sometimes the most extraordinary moments come from ordinary people who make extraordinary choices. That night and every night after, he lived quietly, humbly, but always aware that the strength to step forward, the courage to face fear, and the love to protect others defined who he truly was. And though the world would remember him as a hero, he remembered simply being a father who chose to run toward danger when everyone else ran away. It was enough. It was everything.